Have you ever felt overwhelmed by demands from work, family, and friends? Have you ever found yourself saying yes when you really wanted to say no? Or in a situation where setting clear boundaries could have made a significant difference? Do you ever find it challenging to express your needs without feeling guilty? How do you strike a balance between being accommodating and maintaining your personal limits? Join me after the intro for a conversation with a very special friend with whom we will answer these and many more questions. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's start. Hi, I'm Rosanna D, and this is Forgive and Thrive, a podcast where we explore what thriving in life means and how we can achieve it, irrespective of our past, current condition, and expectations that those around us or society in general may have. Let's go. Welcome to the Forgive and Thrive show. Boundaries are like a North Star, guiding principles that play a pivotal role in our life. They help us navigating all aspects and areas of our life because they are crucial for healthy connections. They define the parameters of our roles and set that thin line between giving and receiving, between contributing meaningfully and sacrificing our health, between nurturing relationships and safeguarding our mental and emotional well-being. But in a world that often demands constant connectivity, how do we strike a balance between being present for others and ensuring that we prioritize that well-being? And how do we resist the urge of saying yes that often feels easier than expressing a gentle yet very powerful no? Understanding and communicating these boundaries become then paramount. So today we want to understand the role of boundaries in shaping our relationships, influencing our interactions, and defining our connections. We share insights on how we can recognize personal limits, the power of assertiveness, and the delicate balance between flexibility and firmness. Navigating difficult conversations becomes an art, and we want to provide you with strategies for expressing your needs openly while fostering empathy. And we dive into this fascinating topic in a conversation with today's guest, Heather Claus. Heather has lived an atypical life. She has hitchhiked across the USA, traveled and worked in a carnival for a season, roamed New York City with street people, explored and taught alternative lifestyles, and much more. All her experience thus far led her to the belief that boundaries are the key to not only saving ourselves, but our relationships. Heather has also published recently a beautifully illustrated book titled Take No Shit, Build Better Relationships Through Discovering, Creating, and Maintaining Healthy Boundaries in 3, sometimes 5 simple steps, where she shares her experience and knowledge of boundaries. Hi, Heather. Welcome to the Forgive and Try show. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is such a joy.
Fantastic. I'm really excited to talk about boundaries because I have to admit, I didn't have any until a few years ago, and I had to learn the power of boundaries at my own expenses. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic with you. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people will benefit from knowing more about boundaries. But before we go into that, I would like to start with you. I mentioned just a few things about yourself, and I would like to start with you in particular, knowing how did you discover about boundaries and in particular decided to write a book about it?
So I also discovered boundaries at my own expense. I got married fairly young, and it turned into, thanks to mental health issues and addiction issues, it turned into an abusive marriage. And when I left, I spent some pretty serious time thinking things through and going over my relationship and what had happened and how I had let it happen. And this was over a decade and a half ago. So I didn't really use the word boundary while I was doing it, but I was looking at, pivotal key points in my relationship and thinking, if I'd have set my foot down right there, things would have been different. If I'd have done it there, things would have been different. And I learned that. And so I wrote down a few things about what was important to me in my next relationship. I went into my next relationship. That lasted about 4.5 years. It was radically different from my marriage, but so radically different that all the fun parts and exciting parts of my marriage were also missing. So I went from, this is too hot to this is too cold. And I wanted something that was just right, like Goldilocks. And so moving into singlehood from that second long-term relationship, I realized that I had just spent about 20 years of my life being with people in relationships that didn't really work for me, that weren't ideal. And so when I met this new guy and I really, really, really liked him, I was like, well, how do I not screw this up? Right? Like, I don't have a great track record. How do I do this right this time? And so I put everything on the table and I said, you've been through some relationships. I've been through some relationships. And, if we're going to do this, I want to do it right. And I don't want to just do it in a way that is acceptable. I want to do this with all the bells and whistles. I want to be in love. I want to be passionate. I want to be open and honest. I want to explore things together. I want no shame. I want us to really make this work, or what's the point? And I was taking a big chance, putting this out there like that. And I was lucky. I don't think he knew exactly what I was going for, but he thought, well, you know what? This doesn't sound awful. And I really like this girl. So sure, I'll agree to it. And here we are over a decade later. And there's been a lot of co-learning together in exactly how to bring two radically independent individuals together to collaborate on building our best lives for ourselves and co-creating the container that is our relationship, and how we make that work through, changes and growth and, new experiences and so on.
Wow, I love what you're saying, and there is so much to unpack already in that story. I love the fact that you have to take risks sometimes in relationships, and not just love relationships, any kind of relationships, to make sure that those personal boundaries are set in place, are known, are respected, recognized. So I absolutely love that. And I also love the fact that boundaries are not something, we may set our own boundaries, but then it's not just for ourselves. Other people need to recognize that. So it's a collaboration, if you like. We work together. You can decide what, or you can understand what doesn't work for you, but then the other person has to respect that boundary. So I absolutely love that. So let's start one step at a time. Let's start from the very beginning. How do you define personal boundaries, especially in the context of relationships and interactions?
So I think that step one, set the boundary, is all about the internal work. So it's, who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I protect those parts of myself that I love and prioritize? And how do I keep away or reduce the things in life that I want less of? So in the book, when I walk people through this, I walk people through the 6 types of boundaries, which are emotional, intellectual, physical, sexual, material, and time. And I talk about different aspects of how these boundaries affect our lives, and I ask over 150 questions so that people can sort of go through these questions and learn more about themselves as they go. That said, for listeners out there who haven't got a chance to get the book yet, there's a exercise that I recommend to my clients that is fairly easy that anyone can do with a pencil and a piece of paper or anything you can write on and jot things down. All you have to do is take one page, put a line down the center of it, and on one side, think about past relationships. What filled you up? When you think about those relationships, even if they ended in a dumpster fire of bitterness and regret, what were the things in those relationships that made the relationships worthwhile while they were working, right? What were the things that even looking back now, you can kind of feel that remembrance of warmth and, the smile that it put on your face. That's what you put down there. These are the things that fill me up, right? On the other side of that piece of paper, that's where you put down the things. And this might actually be the side of multiple pieces of paper, because oftentimes this part grows quite long. What are the things that drain you? What are the things that sap your energy? What are the things that make you feel unloved, undesired? What are the things that make you feel less of yourself? How have you been spoken to in ways that made you feel not enough or too much? And write those down. And that can be things from something as large as they physically assaulted me, right? To something as small as they kept calling me a nickname that I hated, right? That brought up bad feelings inside of me. My ex-husband, I tend to be the more introverted of my relationships. And my ex-husband, being a very, very gregarious extrovert, tended to pick on me and tell me that I was socially awkward. In not so many words, but in ways that really barbed into my heart. And that's something that I had to even work through, in relationships after that, is the idea that, I'm awkward. People don't really like me. They just put up with me. Whereas I'd never, ever had that thought before until, my ex-husband installed that in me. And, working through that. And so that is something that one of my boundaries, and I use this boundary several times throughout the book as an example, is I will not be in a relationship. I will not remain in a relationship that makes me feel less than. If I feel less than, that's not the right relationship for me. If I'm in a conversation and they make me feel less than in that conversation, I will remove myself from the conversation, right? So that's what you do. One side, these are the things that fill me up. The other side, these are the things that drain me. One more quick exercise. Take another sheet of paper and write out the attributes you want, the values you want from your next relationship or the relationship that you're in now that you're wanting to improve. What do you want? Do you want laughter, honesty? Do you want somebody who is open-minded? Do you want somebody who shares your religion? Now, you could also theoretically put in, I want, a 6'4", godlike blonde with $18 million in the bank. You could put that in there, but what we're really looking for, what are the things that make you feel like you have a successful relationship? Or if you're looking forward to a relationship, what are the things that you think need to be a part of that relationship for you to want that to be a forever relationship? Each and every one of the things you write in those 3 little exercises point to a boundary, point to a part of you that you want to protect and nurture, and point to things that you want less of or don't want in your life at all.
I love all of this, and thank you very much for sharing these exercises. They are very easy to do. Perfect start for this episode. Heather, you have gone through a number of experiences. Had that first marriage, you have another long-term relationship, and now you are in one that feels successful. How are your boundaries have evolved during this time?
Well, when I was in my abusive marriage, I believed that if you love someone, you do not leave them. You do everything in your power to make it work. You stand beside them. And if you just love them hard enough and long enough, all you need is love, right? During the later years of my marriage, I found this quote. I want to say it was by Jean Stafford, but not absolutely sure on that. But it was something along the lines of, much to her dismay, far from conquering all, love lazily sidestepped most practical problems. And that really hit home for me, is the idea that I was seeing my love for my partner, and for not just for my partner as a human, but for my partner as the potential that I had projected forward into the future, who he was not being. I was using that as an entitlement. And when I left my marriage, I realized that throughout a good portion of it, while I was suffering abuse, I was telling myself that I was the better person for it. I was the one who loved him with everything I had. And I didn't leave him until it got to be too much, right? Like, I was telling myself stories about how amazing I was for, pushing through all of this. And like, if only he would recognize it. And I was actually not really at that point loving him at all. And I think I could have, if he would have gotten back to who he was. But that also led me to the understanding that I was loving the person I had created in my brain of him, and not who he was and the actions he was taking in my life. So I suffered through them, and I fell in love with my suffering. He was stomping all over my boundaries, and then I was turning that around and saying, well, look at everything I've done for you. Even the things like you never asked me to do, right? So we were locked into that pattern that so many of us get caught up in. This is what I think a relationship should be, and I am going to control as much of this relationship as possible in order to fit it into that mold. And although I was not the abuser in that relationship, I took part in it. Now, let me be clear. If you are suffering abuse, physical, emotional, any kind of abuse, it is not your fault. It is not your fault. And I actually have a chapter in my book that literally says it is not your fault that you have craptaculous boundaries. You did the best you could when you were in the middle of that, right? And if you're still in the middle of it, you're doing the best you can to survive. Know that there is something on the other side, right? I also know that once you get out and you have started to heal that trauma, that the next best step is taking responsibility for not maintaining your boundaries and for the part that you allowed yourself to play. So if they hit you, no matter whether you're just standing there or you're trying to duck, if they manage to land a blow, it's still on them for hitting you. You're not at fault if you don't leave when they hit you. They're still the ones hitting. You also, once you get out and you start to heal, looking at that and saying, I could have left and I wasn't ready. Moving forward into the future, if that situation arises again, I will leave for myself, because now I recognize I had power there that I didn't take for myself. When I started realizing that I had kept myself in this relationship because of the stories that I had told myself about love, because of the socialization that I had around long-term relationships and marriage and love. And that none of that protected me from what I went through, and I didn't protect myself. That's when I was like, okay, I need to be the person who honors other people's boundaries first, because when I honor theirs, I am modeling for myself how I expect and require them to treat me. And that ended up being a huge game changer.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for stressing that whenever boundaries are not respected, on one end, there is a little bit of responsibility that we have to recognize, but also it's not our fault if somebody else steps on our boundaries. And that comes with how we communicate boundaries. Another point that came to my mind listening to you is it might be oversimplifying, but perhaps this behavior of accepting is mostly related to women than men. I don't want to overgeneralize, so I wanted to ask perhaps if there is a difference when setting boundaries between men and women.
We're all raised to have craptaculous boundaries. How we have those boundaries, how we let people stomp those boundaries has patterns within the genders, right? So those of us who were raised as women, we have a lot of our boundaries are around being pleasant, being kind, being nurturing, giving love. And it's funny because my parents didn't raise me that way. I was a tomboy, but society still snuck in, right? So it still got in my head, and I didn't even realize that. Now, if we look over at those who are raised to be men, then we see things like you are the provider. You have to be strong. You can't show your feelings, and so on and so forth. So they end up with different boundaries challenges than we have. And when it comes right down to it, it doesn't really matter your gender. What matters is how are you able to take up space in your own world and encourage others to take up their own space, and then look for the ways that we overlap and can collaborate on creating those relationships, friendships, maintaining family connections, creating love and romance, whatever that might look like.
Thank you very much for stressing out that is not really a gender, but rather the way we have been brought up. So how do we communicate our boundaries?
I mentioned one way to communicate, and that is by example, right? So part of that first step is to understand the flip side of boundaries, which are ethics. So I create my boundaries, and then in order to maintain those boundaries in a healthy way, to be ethical, I also have to honor, accept, and ultimately encourage other people's boundaries. And that's not necessarily a speaking thing, but it's definitely a communication thing. But if we need to speak about our boundaries, then the first thing I would say is there is one word that you absolutely do not want to use when setting a boundary in a relationship you care about. And that word is boundary. Using the word boundary, it's a very trendy topic right now. And a lot of what's going on social media is incredibly confrontational and aggressive. No is a complete sentence. Yes, no is a complete sentence. Is that going to get you the results that you want? just saying no without any explanation, and pause and thinking about how that would feel turned around on you, right? So when I talk about talking about boundaries, I look at it from the perspective of compassion and kindness, because again, we're talking about our relationships that we are hoping to maintain and improve. So instead of saying, "Ah, don't touch me," when you meet somebody, have a plan and say, put your hands together over your heart and say, I am not a shaker, but it is really an honor to meet you today. Like, be prepared to engage with people, honoring who they are and treating them as kindly and compassionately as possible. If I'm in a conversation and I am feeling less than, now I'm not necessarily saying that they are making me feel less than, but for whatever reason in that conversation, I am feeling less than, I give myself permission to say, hey, this isn't going the way that I had hoped it would go. How about we take a 15-minute break and regroup? With my partner, sometimes I'll say, how about we take a break and give each other a big hug, and then we can talk about this tomorrow night at dinner, right? And then we go about our ways. Now, we didn't do that in the first month of dating. We didn't do it in the first year of dating. We didn't even do it in the first 3 years of dating. It took a while for us to learn through our communication, both verbal and nonverbal, to trust the other person was not trying to take advantage with comments like that, or wasn't trying to say, oh, hey, can we step away from this? And maybe we'll just never talk about it again, which causes anxiety in our partners and our partnerships. So say it as kindly as possible, right? So sometimes, setting your boundary and saying it just simply and kindly is enough, right?
I absolutely love that, because sometimes it's very difficult to recognize that someone else is setting a boundary, right? We are more perhaps used when we start the process to recognize our own, but then recognizing the other side is like the other side of the coin, right?
That's exactly it.
We
I feel
need to recognize those.
I feel like if you don't have both sides, you slip so easily back into the patterns of, covert contracts. Well, I'm going to let them stomp on this boundary and then I'll bring it up later so that I get what I want out of them. And it goes right back into that cycle versus I am going to look for every opportunity to honor their boundaries and to give them more and more and more boundaries and freedom within our life together, and require the same from them.
Absolutely fantastic. Heather, you started before mentioning we live in a digital era with social media having a major part in our life. And even the word boundary sometimes is not well perceived. Are there misconceptions that perhaps people have?
Yeah. There's a lot of people who will go into a relationship with another person and they'll say, it's my boundary that you don't spend any time with somebody of the opposite sex. Okay, well, that's not a boundary. That's a rule that you're trying to use to control your partner. A boundary would be if I feel uncomfortable in this relationship because you spend so much time with people of the opposite sex, I will take these steps. In the final hour, if somebody is really going to be that focused on that one thing, the result ends up being essentially the same. You can't spend time with people of the opposite, gender if you're going to be in a relationship with me. But boundaries are meant for us to protect ourselves and for us to choose our actions. not for us to control other people. And if you try using a boundary to control other people, you know what's going to happen? They get to do that with you. And you are essentially saying, as long as I'm allowed to do this, you're allowed to do that. And you're just throwing those boundaries and ethics out the window, and you're going right back into that pattern of control or be controlled. So when people talk about boundaries in ways that are potentially harmful, I generally speak up and call it out because I feel that it's important that people also see the different viewpoint.
Mm, absolutely important. Heather, there is an aspect that I would like to take the conversation. If you are not okay with that, is absolutely fine. But I read on your website that you suffer from a condition, ADHD.
Oh, yeah.
I hope that this doesn't come in any way insensitive, but I wanted to ask you if there is any connection perhaps between neurodivergent condition and boundaries. How can we recognize boundaries that are related to these conditions in a way that we can respect and value their perspective and their communication styles?
Absolutely. I actually, thank you for bringing this up. As a part of this passion project, I actually found myself working, connected with a woman named Briar Harvey from the Neurodiversity Media Network. And we were chatting about boundaries and, dating and so on and so forth. And she asked me if I would be willing to do a series on dating as a neurospicy person, as somebody whose brain is configured in a way that is not common. And so I not only have ADHD, I also have, I was originally diagnosed with ASPD, which is on the psychopathic scale. These days, I think it would probably be diagnosed more as EDD or empathy deficit disorder. So I actually had several challenges through my life trying to connect and fit in with other humans. And because I knew that I was different, and my parents totally accepted that. They loved this about me. They encouraged me. They built me up. I'll tell you, I was actually not prepared for my husband, who said that he loved me in the way that my parents said they loved me, to have so many criticism. And so I didn't have the boundaries or the barriers in place. Now, many people who have ADHD suffer from like RSD, rejection sensitivity disorder. And the reason that they do is because so much of their life has been spent being criticized. So they kind of have the opposite of what I had in my early childhood, and that stomps their boundaries. Right? They try to express themselves, and they're trying to say, "I do not like that texture. It makes me feel bad." And people tell them that they are bad or weird or crazy or odd or whatever, or worse, force them to wear that sweater from Aunt Mabel or whatever it is. And they then learn that their experience does not matter. What I would say is, going back to, kind of our discussion around gender, everyone in, our society today has some challenges with some boundaries. The more challenges you put on top of that, like ADHD or autism or bipolar disorder or, whatever, the more you put on top of that, the more challenging boundaries are often going to be, which is why when Breyer said, people are constantly asking me about dating and relationship advice, and I was like, ooh, this would be exciting because we don't have to talk about specifically ADHD or specifically autistic people or specifically anxiety ridden people or anything like that. What we can do is we can talk about neurotypes. and how some people have these challenges in communication. Some people have these challenges with executive dysfunction. And here's how we can set boundaries not only for ourselves, but then be what I call radically neurospicy, where part of our ethics is to be open and honest and accepting of our differences as they've been explained to us, either by diagnosis or by previous partners, and then invite people to opt in to our lives with all of that. So I'll actually be recording a new episode tomorrow with Briar Harvey, and we're talking about putting yourself out there. So things about like how to say something on like a profile, right? That is open and honest about your challenges, but isn't awful. It doesn't sound negative. So, saying things, I have a hard time being on time, right? Like if that's an issue, that's the type of thing that a lot of certain neurotypes have challenges with time blindness and the ability to be on time. So instead of saying, hey, whatever, I'm just late all the time, like, just put up with it. Or instead of not saying anything at all, you might be the type of person who puts up something that says, sometimes I have challenges with time and sometimes I'm running late. An understanding partner will maybe tell me that things start a little earlier, or remind me when it's time to get ready because I might be engrossed in this video about mountain biking on YouTube or whatever it is, right? Being able to put things like that into a language that shows that you are open and honest while also accepting yourself and making it fun. Another one could be, instead of I get overstimulated easily, how about I prefer getting to know you one-on-one and in small crowds. I tend to carefully plan my adventures so I don't get too overwhelmed. So I'm not the person that's going to go clubbing with you until 3 a.m., but with the right preparation, I'll definitely fly to exotic places and explore the world with you, right? So that way you're letting people know that there are boundaries on what you are able to be, and you're inviting them to accept those boundaries and explore the things that you can do with you.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for going through this question. There is one aspect that comes to mind, and that's when boundaries are crossed, because very often we can develop emotions that like anger, resentment, hatred, that if we stay too long in, might become just a little bit too disempowering for us. So how do we release those emotions? And in line with the name of this podcast, Forgive and Try, I would like to ask you about forgiveness as or self-forgiveness as a possible way to release those emotions, and if they can help us thriving after those boundaries have been crossed.
Bringing that up, especially thriving, reminded me of a topic I wrote about some years ago, the language of survival and the language of thrival. And those things come along with, when I say language, I don't just mean the words that we speak, but how we communicate. I believe communication, rather than just our words, is from the moment that we meet until the end of time, how do I engage with you? That's my communication with you. My body language, whether I turn towards you when you speak, that how the compassion that I use when I do use words. When you look at yourself and you are able to say, I've done everything I thought I was supposed to do in a relationship and I got stomped on. I got hurt. I was betrayed. I was cheated on, whatever that is. The first step is always, it's not your fault. Always, always, always. Because that comes to, I have to be able to forgive myself for living through this. I have to be able to forgive myself for putting up with it, even though looking back, I know I could have stopped it. In that moment, though, I did not believe that, or I would have, right? We did not know. And so in my book, we've got the 3, sometimes 5 simple steps. So we've got step 1, set it. Step 2, say it. Step 3, review it. Step 4, repeat it. Step 5, change. And then after that, the next section is troubleshooting. And in that section, I also, as gently and compassionately as possible, ask questions like, why didn't you take no for an answer? And when we are able to not only forgive ourselves for putting up with the behavior, but we are also able to acknowledge that we gave back in some cases strongly. And we also stomped people's boundaries and used whatever we could to manipulate and get our way. And we can forgive ourselves for that as well, because again, we were in survival mode. Then we realize, again, thinking boundaries and ethics are 2 sides of the same coin, is that to go into thrival mode, we have to give other people the understanding that they are human and they are doing the best they can. And it might be awful what they are doing, and they're probably not doing it to harm you. They are doing it because this is what they have learned will get them through life and get them the most of what they want and that's not good. It's not. It's awful, actually. And yet, to know that it's really more about them and they are just trying to survive and get through life, and the 2 of you, with whatever your survival mechanisms were, just didn't work together, that's powerful. And to me, that is the key to thriving. That is the key to saving ourselves and the key to our relationships. Setting the boundaries around, this is me, this is what I have control over, and all of that, that is not me. And I have no control over it. And I can have compassion for it, knowing that I have made awful, awful mistakes in my own past. And to me, that makes all the difference, is knowing that whatever happened in the past, my ex-husband, he was abusive. He was also mentally ill. He was also an alcoholic. He was just trying to figure out life. And yeah, he ended up being really mean to me, but I don't think he wanted to so much as he just wanted to feel like he had control over things that felt like they weren't anywhere under his control. My ex-boyfriend, his control was not leaving the house hardly at all, not wanting to go anywhere, wanting to game, and so on and so forth. And that stifled me. So I could say, oh, he promised me that we'd do all of these things and then we didn't. And I would be honest, but ultimately he was just living his life in the way that he thought was best. And it just wasn't a good fit for me. If we can do that, if we can forgive ourselves first and foremost for all of the things we didn't do for ourselves, for all of the harm we have caused to other people, even when we didn't mean to, although sometimes we were being spiteful and we did mean to, right? That happens. We're human. As soon as we realize that we are all human and we're all doing the best we can, that is the only door, in my opinion, to step out of surviving and to move into thriving.
I absolutely love that. Thank you very much. Heather, coming back to you now, what are you working on? I know the book has been released just a little while ago, so perhaps you are in the promotion phase. But is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
So Take No Shit is out on Amazon. Right now I have 15 five-star reviews, and I did hit #1 in my category over Thanksgiving weekend. So I actually have a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Yay me. I am currently actually working on the big communications book project. I am also working on a smaller project called When, Not If They Lie. Lies and Lying in Relationship and How to Still Build a Life Full of Love and Trust, which actually was a chapter in my boundaries book that started taking over. So I pulled that out and I'm tightening that up right now. And I'm actually about to start a TikTok channel because I've been doing boundaries interviews for this book for a year now. And we're going to take some of those interviews and the actual authentic words from people I've talked to about boundaries. And we're going to make videos where, like, I play the two different characters that you see on, and one of them is going to be me lip syncing to their actual words, their dubbed words, and then me responding about boundaries. And I'm super excited about that. I think that's going to be a fun way to help educate the world about boundaries in relationships from, my perspective, the kinder, gentler, forgive yourself and stop just surviving and start thriving, aspect of building boundaries in your relationships. And yeah, and then I'm going to do the same thing. Gonna do interviews on different communication things, and I will be looking for people who want to ask questions about, communication and about lies and lying, and I will be taking those and using them to make the books that I write fuller, with a broader perspective and thoughts and ideas from other people about those topics. And then ultimately, I've got an entire series of books in my head based on the concept of what I call lucky in love. And that's that love is a skill that anyone can learn. And boundaries is the foundation. Communication is the next step. We'll also talk about dating and intimacy and all those sorts of things as well as we go down the line.
Wow, fantastic. Lots of projects in the pipeline. So if our
ADHD.
probably, but to see, this fire really that you have inside to cover all these topics, because I think they are really, really crucial of our human experience. So we need really to master the art of setting boundaries, communicating them, and communicating in general. So I think it's extremely, extremely important. So if our listeners would like to know more about you and perhaps getting in touch with you, where they can find you. You mentioned TikTok to come, but
well, I don't have my account there yet, but you can find everything, including my social media links, at my.curiouser.life. You can find the book, you can find the workshop, you can find my coaching, you can find updates on what I'm working on now. You can sign up for an email list. You can even download right now a 100-page PDF sample of my Take No Shit book. So you can get started learning about boundaries. And if you love that, then you can buy the book. And if you don't love it, well, then no harm, no foul.
Fantastic. So we will put all the links in the description of today's episode. Heather, final question. If there was one take-home message that you would love everybody to remember from this conversation, what that would be?
It's something that we actually didn't touch on, except a little bit. So when I say it's not your fault that you have craptaculous boundaries, one of the things that I really, really like to drive home is that we have been taught to have poor boundaries by people who love us, right? Because they want us to make friends and to, fall in love and to, get married. And we've been taught that by people who don't have our best interests at heart. They're all wrong. Boundaries don't put up walls between us and love. They allow us to be the most amazing, authentic selves we can be, and to attract the people who love that. And that, I think, is the biggest thing about boundaries that people miss. People think if I set boundaries, people will love me less. Yeah, if you set boundaries, people who love you for what they can get out of you will absolutely love you less. But the people who love you and all the unique amazingness that you bring into the world and love you for your faults, not just in spite of them, boundaries are going to make that happen. And in every single interview that I have done throughout the year that I've been doing this, and plus, every person who said that they were on the other side of their boundaries journey, that they felt like they have a good set of boundaries now, every single one of them, bar none, has said that the people who show up in their lives now are so radically different. They could not have even imagined it before. The people who love them hard and strong now are not people that they ever even realized existed before they set those boundaries. And to me, I have also found the same. And to me, that is the most powerful thing out there. Set your boundaries, protect yourself, prioritize whoever it is that you love about you and grow that person. And the people who love that person are just waiting to show up for you.
Wow, that is absolutely beautiful. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, it's quite clear to me that the art of boundaries is not a one-size-fits-all concept. It requires ongoing reflection, active communication, and a commitment to personal growth. But when mastered, it holds the key to cultivating healthier relationships and safeguarding our mental and emotional well-being. And I want to leave you with a quote from my favorite Brené Brown, who said, "Daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others." Heather, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for sharing so much about yourself and what you do and your book with us. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for, asking the questions and also for your delightful and insightful summaries at the end of everything that I said. You have an absolute gift with words, and it is beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Well, so have you found yourself overwhelmed and needing to set limits? How do you strike a balance between being accommodating and maintaining your personal space? Let us know. Share your stories in the comments below. Well, and if you want to know more and to learn more about boundaries, please check out Heather's website, her book, and follow her on social media. You will find all the links in the description of today's episode. Hopefully not, but if you have been affected in any way by the topic we discussed today, as always, I invite you to seek professional help. Join me next time when we will continue exploring inspiring and challenging situations, because remember, we are together in this journey. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this content, subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell and like this video. See you in the next one.